Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Happy Independence Day. Happy July 4th. And thank you for tuning in to America Can We Talk? Today, I'm going to talk about Independence Day, July 4th. It's actually our 243rd Independence Day in America. We're going to talk about why the Declaration of Independence matters to you, what's so great about America, God in America's founding, and last, I'm going to share with you some founder and leader wisdom. And finally, I'll share why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth. America Can We Talk is sponsored by GC Works, a Dallas-based company performing advanced technology research in the oil and gas industry.
Hi, and welcome again to America Can We Talk, and again, happy Independence Day. I want to talk almost the whole time today about the Declaration of Independence and the uniqueness it provides in the founding of America, and really it is the core of the rights we just live with and we assume we have in this country. I often say in my political speaking that the Declaration of Independence is the second most important document in all of human history after the Bible, and it is. It is what the writers, the thinkers that put together the Declaration of Independence really brought down from eons, from centuries of history, from thousands of years of history, distilled down into a document, the basic notion that man has rights from God simply because he is born. This is the founding premise of America, that we have rights from God, that countries and governments exist to protect those rights. But I want to start in today's first five, just with a little poll that I happened to come across, and all the rest of the show will be talking about the Declaration. But I wanted to just share this poll because I found it really disconcerting and actually just kind of in need of correction. But this was a pretty large poll, a Gallup poll, that says that American pride has hit a new low. Fewer and fewer people are proud of our political system. They did a poll basically on what people think about all sorts of things about America, and people are proud of things like our scientific success, our military, but they're not proud of our politics. But as you might guess, it breaks down very significantly along partisan lines. You have Democrats in America who self-reported their pride is historically lower than ever. Democrats' latest, only 22% of Democrat Americans say they have extreme pride in our country, whereas 76% of the Republicans say they have remained extremely proud of their country. We have fluctuations. These polls happen all the time. There was, of course, right after the attacks of 9/11 and America coming together as a nation and recognizing that we had to unite as a country to defend ourselves, to find out who attacked us, to take action against them. There were very high numbers in terms of America's across the board, across both sides of the aisle, pride in America. But this most recent Gallup poll, I want to directly address it in the first five because it is not really the result of people thinking about the big idea of America, thinking about the big idea of what America is, what we have as a country unique in all world history. It's a reaction instead to political speeches, the political environment, the environment in Washington, and the environment you hear reflected in evening news and other places. In short, the election of Donald Trump in 2016, and again his re-election campaign going full bore and coming up next year in 2020, you have many Americans on the American left really critical of President Trump. And if you listened to the Democrat presidential debates in the last week, you heard much criticism, and you hear criticism in speeches out of the leaders of the House and the Senate and these Democrat presidential candidates, all really critical of President Trump. And so I do think that this poll, a lot is reflective of just the anger that has been stirred up, in my perception, by the American left, just beside themselves that President Trump has been so successful in this country in bringing the change he promised in his campaign. He has brought the changes the American people chose when they chose him for president. And so there is that kind of unhappiness with the political system. But I really would argue that much of the unhappiness is due to the language and the way in which media and the left-wing media and the left-wing America characterizes what President Trump is doing. And if you believe the characterizations that the media sets in place about who President Trump is, what we're doing, then of course you'd have a bad reaction. I mean, the media spends all their time trying to argue that President Trump is, in some way disrespectful, discriminatory, mean, all the hateful, all these words the left thinks up. And, the people who support President Trump disagree with the whole characterization. They think that President Trump is putting America back on track to be a free market economy, not a socialist country, back on track to having a secure border instead of a borderless globalist society, putting America back on track, having a strong military, standing up for American interests around the world. So there's there are the people who support Trump and like him, they don't support him. And they don't agree with the characterizations of the left. The left would say, he's racist and xenophobic and all the things they say, and that's what explains his polling. But for many Americans, President Trump is reinstating love of America, reinstating a respect for America, a determination to keep America strong, keep America free, keep America safe, have America have secure borders, have laws we all understand are in place. That's what President Trump is trying to bring back. So, I want to urge everyone, whatever you think about President Trump, to step back for a moment and just appreciate the extraordinary greatness of our country, the extraordinary greatness of a country founded on the ideas set forth in the Declaration of Independence. Because we can get too caught up in the current political moment and be critical, and you might be in disagreement with the president on various policy issues. And, this is a free country, you can do that. But the larger idea that every single American citizen should be profoundly grateful for the country we live in, the values that got the country moving, the Declaration of Independence, the ideas our founders set down in that profound document. All of us should be grateful to be living here, should be determined to dig in more deeply, understand more deeply the promise of the Declaration of Independence. It's just extraordinary, timeless relevance. It is not something that the left tries to portray that was written down, by a bunch of old, mean-spirited white men, centuries ago. It is the most important document in all of world history after the Bible. And that, my friends, is today's First Five. I want to turn today and talk about what the Declaration says, and just the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, and why the Declaration of Independence matters to you really almost more than any other document we're all aware of except the Bible. And I'm just going to read the very brief beginning of the Declaration of Independence, which you'll recognize these lines. I'm just going to read a very short portion, but it starts. This is, when in the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Here's the key language we'll be talking about a lot today. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This was the most radical forming idea for a nation ever in human history. The founders started out by saying, not we are subject to a certain king, we're subject to certain royalty, we're subject to a certain, it had nothing to do with race, ethnicity, skin color. It had to do with a profound idea that man, meaning men and women, have rights from God simply because we were born. The government doesn't create those rights, doesn't limit them, doesn't have the right to take them away. They are God-given, ours by our mere existence on earth. And this idea that, so the language it was, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And those rights, as we progress as a nation, the Declaration of Independence is full of descriptions of why they felt led to declare their independence from England, why they said we're going to be free from England. They recounted the wrongdoing by the king in a variety of ways, and they got around, the other passage I just read, got around to saying that government exists to protect these God-given rights, and that the government exists, and again, this term they used, the government derives their just powers from the consent of the governed. Another, toward the end of the Declaration of Independence, among the most profound language, these people to be, and we're going to talk about who some of these signers were, but these people were giving everything up for this mission to declare American independence. They were all British subjects. This was, to the British king's worldview, treason. These founders, after this declaration was created, was written up, they signed off by saying, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." And then they signed their names. And this idea also, this was, again, treason. These are people who were landowners. They were successful. They could weather the storm or whatever the latest, whim of King George was. They could get through it. And they were also leaders at the time in the colonies. Historians have looked back at this period in American history and realized that, even within the colonies, we look back today and say, wow, they were so brave, they stood up. Roughly speaking, about 1/3 of the colonists wanted to stay loyal to England. They did not want to overthrow, they did not want to declare independence, and maybe it wasn't even just loyalty and love of their English heritage or of the king, but it was the concept that it was dangerous to declare independence. They knew they were inviting war, they knew they were inviting British troops to come over to America. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to have the fight. They were okay putting up with the way King George was treating them. So that's 1/3 of them loyalists, maybe in their heart loyalists, maybe just, too fearful about war. A 1/3 of them really didn't care at all. They wanted to carry on their lives, work their farms, run their little corner grocery store, whatever it is they did. They wanted to do their lives and have nothing to do with it. It was 1/3 of the people who got, it got to about 1/3 of the people because of the people who spoke up around New England, around what we now call New England, in Massachusetts and other places back in what we now call the East Coast. Those people had to inspire their fellow friends, neighbors, brothers, sisters, church members, pastors. They had to inspire them to think that there is more to life, there's more to our God-given rights than King George admits, and frankly, that any government in all of world history has acknowledged even existed. They had to inspire people to think that we have the right to live under freedom. That was what they set out to do. And they had to talk to each other in the churches, in the town squares, in homes, in taverns, wherever they gather. They had to inspire people, come on, we can do this. We can stand up. We are worthy. We have rights because we were born. Our primary existence on earth is not just as a subject to some king. It is our right as God's children, as God's creation. We have rights. That is what the spirit of the Declaration of Independence is. And so they move forward with this idea of declaring independence, this liberty, this God-given liberty. I want to run through some of the things that the Declaration of Independence did and didn't say, because when I say I want to talk about why the Declaration matters to you, these ideas, and I know, and I didn't want to be particularly political today, but the American left deplores the concept many of the ideas rooted in the Declaration of Independence, because those ideas are antithetical to the mission of the American left to create a a larger, more controlling, more powerful, centralized government in Washington. When the left wants to take control of more of America, to limit your freedoms, to take more control of more of the businesses in America, more aspects of American life, the healthcare system, they butt up against the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, and they butt up against some very specific things promised in the Declaration and later in the Constitution. And so it's why it is so important for Americans to re-embrace the spirit of the Declaration of Independence and to get some of the core ideas really clear. Number one, this idea of natural rights. What the founders were saying is not that they all sat down one day and had a debate and then voted what rights man should have. They were capturing the idea that because of the existence of God and the existence and man's presence on earth, that because God is our creator, our source of life, that we have rights from him just because we were born. That is the point when the founders said in the very beginning of this that we had, in the course of, they talked about their ideas that these truths are self-evident. They use laws of nature. They're referring to the idea of natural rights, rights no human being gave them, no human being outlined. God gave those rights. This idea of natural rights, very, very antithetical, profoundly antithetical to socialism, communism, dictatorial governments, and frankly, the American left. The idea of natural rights is abhorrent to them. They want to be the ones who define and decide what our rights are. And then second, this idea of created equal, all men are created equal. It was an idea related to the first idea of natural rights, of being God's creation and rights coming from God. It was the notion, this all men created equal, was the idea we all have the same rights from God. We all do. Simply because we were born, unrelated to race, skin color, any other human attribute, the idea of we all men are created equal was a tagging on to because we have the same rights from God, rights to pursue our version, our individual path of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's what this idea of equality was. Not the right to equal outcomes, not the right to have just as much money as everybody else, not the right to have, we don't have the rights to be equal, to be identical with other people. We're all not going to have, we watch athletes and have tremendous athletic ability. No one can give us that ability. It's just people are unique. They have amazing different skills and talents, all of them coming from God. The idea of this, we all have equal rights, is the idea we have equal rights from God, but we aren't identical. We are individuals. We each are individuals with individual strengths, weaknesses, skills, all of that. That's what the idea is, not equal outcomes. The other idea of this natural rights is that these rights pre-exist government. It's really important to get this idea. The rights were ours before, and when they wrote this declaration, they're throwing off England, so the Parliament, England's not in charge anymore. There's no governance here. There were some state legislatures that continue to exist. But they are saying these rights exist regardless of whatever government exists on the whole planet. We have these rights. These rights pre-exist God. These rights are from God. They pre-exist government. They also had the idea that they were trying to define the role of the state. It took more shape when we got around to having the Constitution created. But it was just this idea of the consent of the governed, written into the founding of the Declaration of Independence, means the governed shape the state. The government, the governed, the people shape the country. We gave more clarity in the Constitution with the three branches and the separation of powers and the federalism, all that. We gave separate, divide at the federal level and divide between the federal and the state. gave more definition to it, but the idea of the consent of the government was a driving idea of this. Okay, next thing was, in this idea, this idea of the government does not have, nothing in the Declaration and nothing in the Constitution requires the government to provide anything for us except for the protection of our life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. This is one of the many ways, a great specific example of how the left deplores the ideas of the Declaration and the idea of the Constitution. In fact, when President Obama, years before he became president, was talking about the Constitution, very critical of the Constitution, because he called it, President Obama called it a charter of negative liberties. He was trying to make the point that he was frustrated that the Constitution did not require the federal government to provide things for people. Money, housing, health care, all the things that he, as a left-winger, wanted the government to do. Nothing in the Declaration of Independence, nothing in the Constitution gave the authority for the kind of power President Obama wanted to put into our federal government. So to be very clear, the federal government does not have constitutional authority, and most certainly does not have the constitutional obligation to provide food, welfare, housing, education, anything that the government currently provides to many people. There's no constitutional obligation for the government to do that, and that's what Obama was complaining about. It's even questionable for many people whether the Constitution even permits what the government now does, the extreme breadth of what the government now does in our country. But the other point, a founding point about these rights, is this idea. These rights, we have to fight for them. They're not self-exercising. In order to retain our right to free speech, our right to freedom of religion, our right to freedom of assembly, our right to speak freely, all those rights, you have to fight to preserve them, because tyranny is the natural mindset of many people. So in the show yesterday, we talked a little bit with Lathan, last name, Watts. Lathan Watts. He's can't get his name right. First Liberty guy, Lathan Watts. He was here talking yesterday about these cases the First Liberty takes on to go before the Supreme Court and argue on all sorts of freedom of religion, right, and Establishment Clause cases and Free Exercise Clause cases. These rights, the Constitution spelled out and that were recognized in the founding Declaration of Independence, they are rights that you will forever face the tyranny of leftists, the tyranny of big government people, the tyranny of the mob to try to squelch, reduce, silence, and eliminate. This is what leftists do. This is why there is such a profound importance for people to recognize these rights must be regularly asserted, and they must be, when the rights are even the slightest bit challenged, you must stand up against those people challenging them, because there's always going to be people who will take those rights away from you. That's just a little primer about the first idea in the entire Declaration of Independence. When you hear people say that they don't really like the founders, and they're a bunch of old white guys, or some of them are slave owners and we don't have to listen to them, those same people stridently assert their right to free speech, their rights, all sorts of rights they assert. The reason in our country we even think we have those rights, or we recognize we have those rights, is because our founders wrote that down in the Declaration of Independence. The rights we have in our country, you don't have in communist China. You don't have in Venezuela. You don't have in Cuba. You don't have in in any Islamic country in this world, any Islamic majority country where Sharia is in place. You don't have those rights. They truly are unique. They were unique at the time they're written down. They're unique today. It matters that we recognize our just inherent belief in our rights as citizens of America. They are ours because the founders created a country based on them. The founders were also saying, to be clear, they weren't saying we are making special rules for America because we like America and we want to protect our country we're creating here. They were defining natural rights, meaning the natural right of every person who has ever lived or will ever live on the planet Earth. They were talking about the natural rights of all men. What they were saying was, these are the rights, and we're going to create a country to protect those rights. That is what these people were saying. It couldn't be more profound for the leftists who complain about, old white guys long ago writing stuff. We don't care. The reason we have the country we do is because these people embedded these principles in the core thinking, the fabric of our nation. They are vital to fight for and protect. I want to share with you, so when I say, what's so great about America, I've used that expression so many times. In fact, I think actually, I'm not sure. I think Dinesh D'Souza might have written a book, something like that title, What's So Great About America. But I want to really get back to this. I mentioned at the start of the show today on July 4th about the poll that said a lot of Democrats, only 22% are proud of their country right now. I'm very sorry that they feel that way. But I want to, again, assert this idea. What's so great about America is that we are a nation defined, confined, and just protected by the rights spelled out in the Declaration of Independence, later in the Constitution, spelled out in the Bill of Rights, that these are our defining characteristics. These are our DNA of being an American. That's what they are. They extend throughout all time. They extend to everyone. No one's claiming America was perfect. At the time America was founded, of course, when these documents were written, we had slavery. We also had women with no right to vote. And we did have, at the time, founders acknowledging, we have slavery, and this is not consistent with what we're saying here. But America, one of the beauties, many beauties of the way it was created was we as Americans, through the centuries since the founding of our country, have self-corrected. We have recognized the flaws in the way we humanly express these profound ideas. We have recognized the flaws in them and corrected. So we got rid of slavery with a horrific, the Civil War, horrific death toll in America. It then still stands as the largest death toll in America, the death toll from the Civil War. From all the wars America has been in, the Civil War, largest death toll. We had families turning against each other, but we got the idea you cannot have slavery and be honoring these ideas in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And then we moved forward and we had the Civil Rights Movement. So we even had more course correction for this country, more correction of elimination of the Jim Crow laws, the Southern segregation laws, all sorts of bad things, inconsistent with the Declaration of Independence, inconsistent with the Constitution. And then we had the women's rights and women being able to come forward and eventually be able to vote was one of the first steps, and then be able to own property and eventually have equal access to education and equal access to careers and jobs and laws that protect against protect women against sex discrimination in employment and in making. So we've made tremendous progress in this country, and this is why it is so pitifully sad that a poll is saying today that a low number of Democrats actually think America is great. They're critical of America. And when we live in this country, we've made so much progress, and the progress was possible because of the system we set up and because of the values laid out by the founders from the time of the founding. The values of our founders got us to where we recognized these things aren't right. We had those principles set in place. And I want to tell you just a few little quotes about God and America's founding. Again, we had an expert on the show yesterday from First Liberty talking, about this whole, litigating over freedom of religion, over protecting individuals and the right to free speech and free religion, protecting against violations of the Establishment Clause, or trying to basically protect religious freedom. And there is a strident atheistic movement in this country. When we had Lathan Watts on yesterday, he was mentioning some of those organizations, Freedom from Religion, as he mentioned yesterday, stridently, I mean, sending out thousands of letters around the country to all sorts of organizations and public entities and city councils and county governments, just sending letters all the time saying, you're not allowed to pray, you're not allowed to have reference to God in your public hearing, you're not allowed to have, as Lathan talked about, the Bladensburg Cross. We have strident atheism in this country, determined to remove the idea of God ever being present, symbols of religion being present, symbols of faith being present in our public life at all. So we had that one organization he mentioned. We had the American Humanists. We had the Separation. I can't remember all the names of the groups. They don't even matter. They're just determined to shut God out of American society and governance. I just want to share a couple of quotes that were from our founders. And I have a little book of quotes here. I'm going to read different ones as we go through the show today. But one of them related to how George Washington thought about God in terms of what our country is. George Washington: no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. Many, many quotes from George Washington recognizing the vital need for God in America, God in keeping our country together, God in shaping our country's course. Benjamin Franklin, back in 1787, this is chronicled in a book by Bill Bennett, the American Patriot Almanac. An impasse was reached in the drafting of the Constitution. So here's Benjamin Franklin, most senior guy there. And so they reached an impasse drafting the Constitution, big project. The fear was growing the entire endeavor would collapse in rancor and confusion. The 81-year-old Franklin made a simple but profound suggestion. They should pray for guidance. He reminded the others that the Continental Congress had asked for divine aid at the start of the Revolutionary War. And this is now Franklin talking about prayers in creating the Declaration. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? So this was, Benjamin Franklin making that point that they had to pray in the creation of the Declaration, the Revolutionary War, the Constitution, and that, I could read literally dozens and dozens and dozens of quotes by former American presidents, by people in this, leadership in America who talked about God's hand in the creation of America. Zachary Taylor, President 1849-1850, and he's talking about the Bible. It was for the love of the truths of this great book, the Bible, that our fathers abandoned their native shore for this wilderness. Animated by lofty principles, they toiled and suffered till the desert blossomed as the rose. Isaiah 35:1. The Bible is the best of books. I wish it were in the hands of everyone. It is indispensable to the safety and permanence of our institutions. A free government cannot exist without religion and morals, and there cannot be morals without religion, nor religion without the Bible, especially should the Bible be placed in the hands of the young. So I could go on with these quotes, but these are all quotes, just dozens of them that you can understand can be part of the way we should think about the Declaration. But now I want to turn to a couple amazing things that people said about the Declaration itself. And this is a Ronald Reagan quote. These are just leaders that spoke up their wisdom about our country. Ronald Reagan, September 9, 1982. We are a nation under God. I've always believed that this blessed land was set apart in a special way, that some divine plan placed this great continent here between the oceans to be found by people from every corner of the earth who had a special love for freedom and the courage to uproot themselves, leave homeland and friends, to come to a strange land. And coming here, they created something new in all the history of mankind, a land where man is not beholden to government, government is beholden to man. And then Frederick Douglass, 1852, the Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost. President Abraham Lincoln, summer of 1858. Now, my countrymen, if you've been taught doctrines in conflict with the great landmarks of the Declaration of Independence, if you've listened to suggestions which would take away from its grandeur and mutilate the fair symmetry of its proportions, if you've been inclined to believe that all men are not created equal in those inalienable rights enumerated in our Charter of Liberty, let me entreat you to come back. Return to the fountain whose waters spring close by the blood of the Revolution. Think nothing of me. Take no thought for the political fate of any man whomsoever, but come back to the truths that are in the Declaration of Independence. And Abraham Lincoln, he had numerous other ones. He said, I've never had a feeling politically that did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence. I've often pondered over the dangers which were incurred by the men who assembled here and framed and adopted that Declaration of Independence. I've often inquired of myself what great principle or idea it was that kept this Confederacy together for so long. I mean, he went on and on. I want to read you this one other just kind of amazing quote. This is Calvin Coolidge, president. This was a statement or a speech he made in 1926. About the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward toward the time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than those of our revolutionary fathers. I mean, folks, this little book I'm reading from, I'll tell you, we had an event in our home last night. We invited a close circle of friends to kind of honor Independence Day and July 4th and just talk about the meaning of America. And so we collected some really, really profound, kind of lengthy booklet of clips of what people had said, people who love our country and just felt it was how important it was to speak about America and to honor America for what it is. I'm going to just, I guess I'll close our show today here on July 4th with telling you one last quote from John Quincy Adams. Speaking at a July 4th celebration in 1837, this is John Quincy Adams. Why is it that, next to the birthday of the Savior of the world, your most joyous and most venerated festival returns on this day, July 4th? Is it not that, in the chain of human events, the birthday of the nation is indissolubly linked with the birthday of the Savior? That it forms a leading event in the progress of the gospel dispensation? Is it not that the Declaration of Independence first organized the social compact on the foundation of the Redeemer's mission upon earth? That it laid the cornerstone of human government upon the first precepts of Christianity? And it was really interesting. John Quincy Adams, not the only one, but there were others too, who tried to make the point that in all of world history, this nation, in our very founding, took these profound biblical truths in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And as a matter of fact, much of what is quoted by the founders in the Federalist Papers and in the writings surrounding the creation of the Declaration of Independence were from the Old Testament. So it's very much a Judeo-Christian idea. But the point of it was, John Quincy Adams and many others recognized that America really was the playing out of the promises God made to his people of having rights because they're his children, the right to live under these values that were imbued in the Bible, that America was a country that came forth and gave shape to those promises in the form of the United States of America. And so I'll close our July 4th show by saying there is no country on earth that parallels the historic significance and the profound commitment America has to the very idea of individual responsibility, mixed with personal responsibility and individual freedom, that the individual rights, individual freedom go together, and they are from our very founding the ideas upon which our country was based. And so when I say in the show so often that this show is dedicated to talking about, to celebrating, to sharing, to speaking out for the notion that America is an exceptional nation. It has nothing to do with race or ethnicity or skin color, has everything to do with the profound ideas that were set forth in our Declaration, that were the result of centuries and literally millennia of thought by philosophers, scholars, thinkers about what should we view to be man's rights. And it was in this country, back in 1776, that our founders finally pulled together a document, the Declaration of Independence, that basically said, we are going to create a country rooted in the idea of individual liberty, a commitment that we're going to protect the right of each individual to pursue his and her version, pursue life, liberty, and their version of happiness. That was the idea, that we want a country founded on living in freedom, with the notion under a God we understand to be the source of our life and our protection and the very source of our existence. That's what America is really all about. And now I want to turn to our last few minutes and talk about why these matter to you. So on this Independence Day, number 243, why it matters to you, America is still the boldest experiment in liberty and self-government in all of human history. Daniel Webster made the point, hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the Republic for which it stands. Miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years may not happen again. Hold on to the Constitution, and I'll add in the Declaration, for if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world. These self-evident truths are still self-evident truths. All men and women are created equal by our Creator. We are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It took a pledge of the lives. I think we've got to move to the next slide here. It took a pledge of lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to found America. It requires the same to preserve her. I wanted to stay on this slide, go back to that slide 1 second. I had a bunch of quotes ready to tell you about relating to the signers who pledged their lives, fortune, and sacred honor, but really many of them gave all of that. They lost their lives, they lost their fortunes, they were, pilloried by the British, they were pilloried by fellow Americans who didn't want them to be doing. These people really pledged everything. And so in a significant way of honoring them is to recognize that we honor them when we do the same, give the same level of commitment, unrelenting commitment to preserving America that they did in creating America. We must speak up for our rights at every moment. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the whole thing. Okay, next slide. The left would have all Americans believe there's nothing special about this country. And back to the poll I mentioned in the beginning, leftists in this country see the country the way it is portrayed to them by their leaders. And you hear people on the left, the presidential debates last week, You hear people relentlessly at the highest levels on the American left denigrating America as a country filled with hate and racism and xenophobia and all this other garbage. Cannot possibly, it has no connection to reality, and many Americans know it, but it is a time in this country to be outspoken about the goodness of this country, not just the ideas that founded it, but what America is today. There's a simple common sense answer to the left. Is there any country on earth where people are lining up desperately seeking to get in? For all the left's just piling on America, we're the country everyone still wants to come to. And this last little, I think is our last one, the reading list recommendations. This book, The 5,000 Year Leap by Cleon Skousen, must read. Also, The Founder's Bible by David Barton. Remember George Washington, and I read this, I gave this quote to you earlier, but no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency. I guess we have one more. Frederick Douglass. I read this once, I won't do it again. Declaration is a ring bolt to our chain, our nation's testimony, nation's destiny. And then Samuel Adams. It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brushfires of freedom in the minds of men. And so, my friends, I want to wish you a very special, precious, wonderful July 4th weekend. Hope you enjoy your families, your friends, your barbecues, your parades. But most of all, I hope you spend some time contemplating the enormous blessing it is to live in this country founded on the liberties set forth and described in our Declaration. Hope maybe you want to read the Declaration over the weekend and realize that it is our job, as it is in every generation of Americans, it's our job in this time to preserve this precious country that so many sacrificed to create, a country unique in all of world history, committed to protecting individual liberty and our right, each of us having a right to live and pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is an extraordinary blessing to be an American. Talk to you next week.
Can we talk? Truth about America.